What is going on, guys? It's Halsey Schider with the Helicopter Podcast, and I hope that you've been enjoying some of the recent podcasts I've been doing from Europe. Back in studio for this podcast, but we certainly had a great time at European Rotors. We're going to be sprinkling in, I think I did 8 podcasts when I was in Amsterdam, and we're going to kind of sprinkle them in throughout the next few months. It was such a great show. And undoubtedly, if you're listening to this episode, then you also had an opportunity to check out the episode I did with Robinson Helicopters while in Europe with David Smith, their CEO, and Randall Schaefer, their new president of customer success. So had a great time. As always, thanks to the MHM publishing team for making the HeliCASTS platform possible. If you haven't checked out the other HeliCASTS podcasts, I highly recommend them. The Hangar Z, the Real Rescue, and of course the Vertical MRO. And always make sure that you're subscribed to the Vertical Daily News and Sunday Review as we post all of our podcasts there every week. And of course, you can check out our podcast on all major listening platforms. And today I am joined by a new friend. This gentleman, Shawn Johnson, actually was introduced to me just a few weeks ago through our friend Clint Pulver, who's been on the Helicopter Podcast before. And Shawn is part of the Hill community. So I'm definitely interested to talk to you about that, Shawn. And I'm also just interested to hear, because you have a bit of a zigzagging path that's actually taking you out of full-time flying. You're doing other things now, and I think you're doing quite well. So just excited to learn about that. Shawn, welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm doing well, and I'm honored to be here. Thanks, Halsey.
Of course. Yeah, we're trading podcasts this week. Actually, Shawn's invited me on his podcast. What, just for our listeners, what is your podcast? Where can they find it? And what's kind of the MO for you guys?
Yeah, so it's called the Pay or Quit podcast. It's really designed for entrepreneurs, and we try to cut through the fluff. I mean, it seems like so many podcasts, especially business podcasts, just, want to talk about the upside and the wonderful things about owning a business. And although there are wonderful things to own a business, we really try to get to the challenging parts, how we got through them, how we, progressed as entrepreneurs to get through that and to succeed. But it's Pay or Quit, it's called, and it's anywhere you find a podcast. So Apple and Spotify and YouTube, if you will. So it's out there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've actually checked out a couple episodes and preparing for me to be on it. You guys do a great job. I like how you kind of do your guys' teaser intro as well. Something that we've thought about doing on this podcast as well, but I haven't. I kind of my whole concept's just been like conversation start to finish, kind of vanilla, pretty basic, but it's kind of been the scheme. But I really like how you guys are doing your production. Excited to join that podcast and talk about what it's like, for me at least, to be an entrepreneur. I think we listen to too many stories of all the successful entrepreneurs. We never hear all their failures in between, them now being successful. And man, I get my butt kicked every single day as a business owner. I own 2 businesses now, and actually 3 if you include the podcast. So super excited. But that's interesting. You have an entrepreneurial podcast, but you're a helicopter guy. So obviously that leads to kind of what I teased about in the beginning. So before we kind of get to what you're doing now and why you're not part of, day-to-day helicopter operations, just give us a little bit more background on your helicopter experience, where you went to school, or what your job trajectory was, et cetera.
Yeah, so it started pretty early, I guess. I had that love that so many of us helicopter pilots do, at a very early age, and went to business school. And then I realized I'm not sure I'm going to get the best ROI from a traditional college. So let's niche that down. And I was always interested in helicopters, went to flight school, got my private. In about, 30 days, I pushed it hard. And that was in Scottsdale, Arizona at Universal Helicopters. Then got my commercial up at Hillsboro. I think we have that in common. At Hillsboro, yep, definitely. Well, it was a great experience. Of course, there's a lot of rainy days.
What years were you there again?
Oh, so that was 2006 and 2007. Left right at the beginning of 2007.
Man, I just missed you by like a year. I think I just started kind of right after, so we almost crossed paths. Yeah, do you remember? Was it you that was saying you flew with Marcus?
No, I had Tobias Froming and Aaron. I can't remember Aaron's last name. She was my favorite flight attendant. She was
Oh,
phenomenal.
Erin. So Erin, God, I think her last name is now Kirkendall if she changed
Okay.
it, but she was, if it's the same Erin, obviously not a ton of female instructors and not that many named Erin. So I'm guessing it was her. But she actually ended up marrying my instructor, which was become a good buddy named Rory Kirkendall.
Okay.
Uh,
Man, I'll have to look her up and connect, reconnect.
and Erin is a badass, and she had a pretty cool career after. I haven't stayed in touch with Rory. I kind of feel like maybe I don't know if they're both flying still or how that works. I think they have a couple kids, and life changes. But
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely remember Erin well, and that whole group. Hillsborough is a great. I really enjoyed Hillsborough just because of the size. Because of the size, it's allowed me to have tremendous networking. Post school, which has been super important. So you got your private. What's the time gap between getting your private at Universal and then getting your commercial at Hillsborough? And why did you not go back to Universal for commercial?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it was about a year and about 2 months. So I got my private, year and 2 months. I got my commercial or so. And I just felt like there was just a lot of expense at Universal. It just was very costly. And I didn't love the structure there. It's a self-funded, I got the private loan, if you will, to pull this down, and I felt like there was just a lot of draws from that big account, and so I was like, I'm going to try something new and shift it up to Hillsborough.
Yeah, it's interesting. I can't speak to Universal. In fact, I have some great contacts at Universal and some people I greatly respect. And I know that Universal certainly has a great reputation and a great training program. I mean, look, they've been around probably as long as most, if not the longest. But sometimes you have to advocate for yourself, right? And if you feel that maybe your money's being spent inefficiently, then you have to go and advocate for myself or for yourself. It's something that I try to do every day. And flight school, you definitely have to do. I mean, if you're listening and you're going through flight school right now, if it feels a little weird or it seems like you're spending more money than you should, or you're doing more ground, or you're repeating flight lessons, you should take note of that kind of stuff, because no one's going to protect your money like you protect your money. In fact, the flight school is a business, right? They want to receive your money, and they should, for good services rendered. So I think it's an important lesson that Shawn felt like a little weird, and so he said, "Hey, let me try it out." When you went to Hillsborough, was there a significant difference in how they ran things compared to what you were used to?
Yeah, definitely. So one thing that was very notable is that when you had a flight hour and instruction time, that was the direct withdrawal from the account, if you will, as opposed to how Universal was doing it. They were doing it based off of a lump sum. We'll withdraw some, but that was drawing down interest. So you take $10,000 out. You haven't used $10,000. You haven't actually received $10,000 in training yet, but you're getting charged an interest rate on $10,000. That's just an example.
Yeah, it makes sense. So they're doing it like a lump sum block type deal. And yeah,
Yep.
interesting. So you go to Hillsborough, you knock out your commercial, and by this time you went to business, like you had graduated from college, business school, and things like that.
I just had an associate's at that time. Yeah.
Okay. So what happens next?
Yeah. So, got my commercial. I fall in love. I meet my future wife at the time.
Nice.
And so she was living in San Diego. And so I decided, let me move down to San Diego. And I got a job at Corporate Helicopters with the commercial rating while I was working on my CFI. They were amazing to take me in under their wing before I had a CFI. But they knew I was working on it. And the chief pilot back then was just phenomenal to me and really took me under. And that was time building, right? It was, as soon as I got to 500 hours, they put me on the 135 cert, and I was flying banknotes and doing little charters from here to, LA to San Diego and whatnot. And I stayed there for about 2 years before I could build up enough time and I continued on my instrument rating to go to then the Gulf of Mexico at that stage. So it was, flying 206s and the straight lines over ocean.
Yeah, very cool. Corporate helicopters, it's that's another company that's been around for a long time, pretty good reputation. Ivor Shear, is the proprietor of that business. I feel like Ivor is a little bit of a legend, and Ivor is one of those characters that this happens to me sometimes. I feel like I know Ivor really well because I've done business with him. He's very kind to me. He says really nice things to me, and he seems like a pretty straightforward guy. And I've talked to him a million times. Don't have any clue what the guy looks like. Never seen him in person. We've always tried to cross paths at Heli Expo. Never happens. So I have like a picture of like what I think he might look like, but I also very confused on what he may look like. So it's just, I don't know. It's just so funny. Every time I talk to Ivor, I'm like, I should just Google him and see what he looks like. It's driving me nuts.
Ivor's an awesome guy. He has a cool portfolio, cool story too. Just years of Hollywood film stuff. It's cool.
I was actually just down in the LA area. It's a little side tangent, but I got to do a ride along with the LAPD actually in their helicopter unit. So I met them downtown. I was flying the morning shift or riding along the morning shift, I should say. And I don't know if you're familiar with the LAPD program, but they have a giant heliport in, Los Angeles. And on top of this building, the building is, you kind of meander around a maze to get to the top. It's not a very tall building. I don't know, maybe 6-7 stories. And the lower half seems like there's a lot of LA vehicles, like, utility vehicles, police cars, damaged police cars. And then you get beeped into this whole flight department, and it's pretty cool. And we flying around LA in a 125, got on a couple calls, didn't find any bad guys, but we were looking. But that super cool experience. I was really surprised on how simple the airspace was. I always think of LA and I think of like complex because I haven't really done any flying there. But man, they were hardly talking to anyone other than some common traffic. We talked to Santa Monica once or twice. We talked to Burbank once or twice. Was that your experience when you were flying in LA too? Like it's big airspace?
Yeah, I think the helicopter routes, they're super efficient. And going through those routes are really pretty simple. Once you figured out where you wanted to go, it was easy to replicate that each and every time. Yeah, I loved it. It was nice.
And were you also flying turbine aircraft with Ivor, or was that all piston time?
Yeah, just 206 time. I think I only gained a couple 100 hours at that stage in the 206. Yeah.
Hey, that's pretty good actually though, because it's, I don't know how it was back then. I think it was harder. I feel like it was harder because when I was going through training was slightly after that point, call it 2007, 2008. It seemed like a very competitive job market at the time. And, turbine time was so coveted. And, for you to get that turbine experience, that seems like it came a little bit earlier than it came for a lot of people.
Yeah, it was right around the 500 mark. Once I got the 135 and the R44, they started to get me into the 206 at that stage. And we would do, little charters. But then, Ivor was great. He put me into international charters. I'd go down to Tijuana, Ensenada, that kind of stuff, do the Ensenada bike race and just do some different stuff. That's what really drew me to corporate helicopters. It was different than your standard flight school where you just get instruction time. Although I liked instructing, I really liked the other stuff better.
Yeah. Look, instruction, I think, has its place. I always tell people that I became a much better pilot because I was an instructor. You really start to see all the mistakes that you used to make just from a different perspective. And I think that really allows you to accelerate your understanding of just being a better pilot, being a better decision maker. But, also being able to have that experience plus some actual real world commercial experience, I think that's really invaluable. And that's definitely a neat mix. And someone like Corporate Helicopters there with Ivor, I mean, that's a company that is kind of a jack of all trades, tours, 135, instruction, you name it, Ivor's probably done it in a helicopter, which is pretty cool. Funny story. I was at the Robinson safety course. I did some content down there for the R66. In fact, if you go to the vertical, YouTube, Vertical Magazine YouTube channel. You can go ahead and search for my time at Robinson. Super fun time. And the instructor was this, I think he's French, and a pretty thick accent. Every time he said the word however, it kept sounding like he said Ivor. He said Ivor. And Ivor's here? Ivor's here? Ivor's here? And it took me like every time he would say, and he said it a lot, I would turn and look, oh, where's Ivor? But I figured out he was just saying however, but it was Ivor, just with the accent. So kind of just a funny Ivor story. At least I find it funny. So you end up in the Gulf, a place where I never had much excitement to ever go. Not saying I didn't try to apply. It was very, very hard when I got out, when I had like my 1,000 hours. Nobody was hiring. Kind of post-economic crash, things were not great, so it was hard to get a job. I think I applied for PHI, ERA, man, you name it. I applied. I think even some of the smaller, like Panther was one, and some other RLC. I never even got a call back, so I didn't really want to go in the Gulf. I'm afraid of sharks, afraid of water. So what was your experience like flying in the Gulf?
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned aeromedical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140 plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completion Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.
Yeah, that's it is just like that. The sharks over water. No, I think I waited till about 1,250 hours, and again, I had some turbine time that helped. But yeah, it's straight line. It's going basically distance and time over water. Really challenging flying. I felt like, even though it's at sea level, it felt like a high DA. You had all the high humidity. It was always heavy. They loaded those things up. They're workhorses, utility flying. And the weather was always, high or lower. It felt like lower clouds. You were always battling that. But I loved it. The only thing I didn't like is being away. Like you're in a hot, humid, no air conditioned environment, and you're away from family and whatnot. And I didn't love that part. So I stuck it out for about 2 years. But I got a retirement gig there pretty quick, and I don't know how I got it, but that put me on a golf course in South Padre Island, now near where SpaceX's Texas launch site is.
Yep, great kiteboarding.
Yeah, great kiteboarding. Yeah, and I'd be done with my routine every day about 11 o'clock, and then I'd be chilling on the golf course or in the condo.
Man,
it was sweet. So I didn't build a ton of time in a short amount of time, but it was a good gig.
Yeah, it's funny. I think that there's a lot of misconceptions to first turbine jobs. Obviously, this wasn't your first turbine job, but for most people, 1,000 hours, you're flying in the canyon, you're flying in the Gulf, maybe some tours. And I think that there's a common misconception, like those are all just very easy, straightforward jobs. And I think that if you go into the mindset like, oh, I'm going to go fly in the Gulf, A to B, super easy, blah, blah, blah. Or I'm going to go fly in the ditch. Weather's nice every day, super easy. Yeah, there's some truth to that, right? The Groundhog's Day effect is certainly real. The day-to-day feels the same, but there's actually still complexity. I think anytime you're operating a helicopter, specifically for hire, there was complexity. In the Gulf, I know that weather is a complexity that I think people underestimate, which is funny to me. Like, of course, it's going to have low clouds, right? And foggy days. I mean, that's like staple for coastal environments, right? What is the FAA weather? Tropical maritime environments, you're going to have that type of weather. Flying tours, that's what I did. That was an early, kind of a mid-career point for me because I had done some other cool stuff before going into tours. And I think if I was fresh out of flight school, I still could have gone and successfully flown tours. I mean, a lot of people do. But again, it's still, you got 7 passengers on board. You're operating with a chaotic, busy airspace with lots of other helicopters all at the same time, going out and coming back in. You got people talking to you while the radios are going. There's a lot to keep your eye on. you're flying in really windy environments, getting really bad turbulence. So I think that there's complexity to all missions. And so I'm glad to hear that you also point out that fact that, the Gulf is the Gulf, but there's complexity to that. The weather part always to me would have been the hard part. I'm very conservative when it comes to low clouds and low vis. Did you see your minimums changing over time of like what you would feel comfortable with? Like, I remember I've seen like 5 miles before and I'm like, oh God, that's horrible. And then you do it for a while. You're like, okay, 5 miles is nothing, but then you see 3 miles for the first time. You're like, ooh, 3 miles is really sketch. Like, what did that change for you?
Yeah, totally. It got less and less, if you will. And for instance, I'll put a misconception I had. Part of what was challenging there is that the muddy waters coming out of the Mississippi are the same as the ugly horizon line, if you will. And it's easy to, get that low light environment and lose horizon. But some of the minimums over land was 300-foot ceilings with 1 mile visibility. And I have a story there. I was ferrying the helicopter back out of Port Isabel back to Rockport, Texas. And I just remember, I was basically at minimums going through a warm front. And if you've ever flown through a warm front with nasty weather, you actually feel the temperature change when you go through it. It's bizarre, but it was 301, and it was steady. But I came up against a field of large turbine, the windmills that are right there, and I was eye level with the rotor, a blade. You're at 300 feet, it's pretty freaking sketch. And those weren't on the chart. You just, you got a mile to react, if you will. And it was a wild time. But yeah, just to answer your question, I think you got used to flying in those low vis because it was just common. But I had this old time pilot tell me something that was super smart. There's a day, it was crew change day. So get home-itis is happening. No bueno. And I was offshore. I had a offshore platform. I was at 135 miles offshore, and it was nearing the end of the shift. And at the end of the shift, you're typically lower on fuel, right? You're going to land with, a little bit more than minimums, but it's pushing it. And you're get home-itis. So he gets on the radio and says, "Hey, Shawn, I recognize your situation here. It's not worth it. Don't push time and don't push fuel, or don't push time and don't push weather, and don't put any combination of those two things." Because, the old saying is that the Swiss cheese lines up. That's what happens. And he got on the radio and said, "Look, I've already called another platform that I stay at a lot. They've already got a bed made up for you. It's all ready. Just go land. That platform has fuel. And tomorrow we live another day."
Yeah.
It was like the best, as I look back, it was like the best radio call that I've ever had, because, maybe nothing would have happened. More than likely not. But why push that, right? It was just, it was a good learning experience, especially early on in the Gulf, which is a very challenging environment to fly.
I like when, senior pilots, people with more experience, been doing it for a long time. I like when they step up like that. It's easy to be at a company and you're working with some old geezers and they're a little bit salty and unapproachable, and they don't really impart their wisdom, but sometimes they do. And when they do, man, it's so invaluable. Something that you mentioned there, and I don't think we talk about it enough on the podcast, is the get home-itis, right? That's such a killer. And, ironically enough, I don't think it's a hazardous attitude. I think there's somewhere it kind of falls into, probably a hazardous attitude. But I always kind of made fun of the hazardous attitudes by the FAA, because it seems like it's like one of those, goofy early 70s, like training videos, mantras, what's the antidote for macho, and it's like just so, the way it's presented just makes it seem lame, but then you get into the career and you're like, oh man, these hazardous attitudes are real. Like, this is actually what's killing people. And to this day, I full-heartedly believe the data that suggests that, 98 to 99% of all accidents are because of a decision. Rarely is the helicopter having such a bad day that it's going to kill you. But it's such small margin that you as a pilot, you make one bad decision and boom, there you go. And so I love hearing that guy had your back in that situation. Has there been other times in your career where you've had to battle kind of an internal hazardous attitude? I know I've had several.
Yeah. When I was at corporate, I was doing a charter from LAX, the rooftop helipad in between the sets of runways in LA to San Diego. And I just picked up this executive, and it was an R-44. It wasn't super crazy or anything, but, the Marine layer in Southern California is a real deal. And there's this route on the beach. It's a beach route, Class Charlie off of Orange County. And I remember just flying that route like south of Fullerton, and I couldn't even recognize that Marine layer. It was dark. It was nighttime. Marine layer rolling in. And the passenger I had, this executive, just fly under it. Just fly under it. And it's like, dude, you don't fly under the Marine layer. That one's like going to the ground. And so I climbed up, and before I recognized, I was right at the edge of Charlie. And that was a real eye-opener there, like not being prepared for that as a low time. I probably had 600 hours just freshly doing those charters. Nighttime, bad weather, and, just a way too green. But one of those things. And I finally called in Orange County and like, thanks for the heads up, proceed southbound. And I could skirt over just the top. I think it's all echo right there underneath that Charlie anyway. So, the minimums were fine, but it was an eye opener for me. You felt like my pants were around my ankles a little bit. You know what I mean?
Look, things happen fast. And unfortunately, when you're a new pilot, you will, I don't think it's if, I think it's when you will face a situation that's a little bit over your pay grade at that time. And the important part is that at that time that you recognize it. And that's your cue of like, should I be doing this? How can I mitigate the current situation? And then when you land, I mean, this has happened to me a handful of times. I can't point out a specific instance just off the top of my head, but I know the moments occurred where I'll land, I'll kind of decompress, reflect, and I'll kind of mention in my head, like, man, I think that was a bit of a near miss. Yeah. I think that I like how I handle it, but I think I got a little too far into it compared to probably what I would tell myself I would do, on the ground if someone were to ever ask me, if that makes sense. So totally. I think it's really good to self-reflect, especially when you're a new guy, because you're going to put yourself undoubtedly into situations that pop up. It may just be incidental. Weather changes fast, especially on the coast. 1 minute it's severe clear, the next minute there's a marine layer. And so I think it's important to always be evaluating that. And I think you have to personally learn from that. And then you can even have conversations. I've had plenty of conversations with my higher ups or with other peers or guys that might have a little more experience and say, man, this just happened to me. Oh yeah, that's happened to me before too. And, then you share those stories and learning occurs. And so I think we all inevitably will have some near misses. The key point is to try not to intentionally allow it to happen. Let it be more unintentionally. And I would always teach students to have this idea of a red flag. Like you should always be giving yourself a red card, right? Like I think of soccer, if you don't do your pre-flight, you got to give yourself a red card. Like that's a non-starter to me. Like if you're not willing to spend the 20, 30 minutes to thoroughly look over an aircraft that you're about to go fly, that's a red card. Like you shouldn't be flying. Another red card, not using the checklist. I was a professional pilot for a lot of years. I always use my checklist. I get in the helicopter with a lot of private owners, which you're going to be hopefully soon. And, you're going to bring a different perspective because you were a professional guy in the past. But these guys don't use checklists. To me, red flag, right? It's so easy to forget things. And I would teach my students, if you feel like you're red flagging yourself, then pause, take a deep breath, and reevaluate the situation.
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over $150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
Yeah. I have an interesting story. When I first entered the Gulf, there was this guy that went into the class, the 135 class, right after me. And you speak of red cards. One of my red cards is a final walk around before I get in the cockpit. Because my gosh, I've heard it a million times where somebody leaves a cowling open. I hate that. So anyway, I'm in the Gulf and I hear a mayday, mayday, mayday going on the radio. And this guy just graduated, the class after me. So I'm 3 weeks into this. He's 1 week into this. And he's mayday, mayday, mayday. He's able to land it on a platform. Come to find out, he sent the engine cowling up through the main rotor. And he feels it, it does the jolt. I don't know even what that feels like. But I mean, dadgummit, just walk around a stinking helicopter and you solve that problem. I don't know how many times I heard the seatbelts flapping out, the 407 and $90,000 carbon fiber panel is ruined because of a seatbelt. And yeah, red flags are a good way to put it.
Yeah, I like that. In fact, and you have to also be committed to actually doing a good job. And this is a story that I'll convict myself in. And I don't think I've told this story, but you just reminded me of it, is I'm religious about the final walk around too. There's a couple of things I'm religious about. Good pre-flight planning, of course, final walk around, checklist usage, and a hover check. Meaning before I just pull power and leave the ground, I bring it to a 3 to 5 foot hover, check everything. Are we good? Everything feels good. Okay, go. Right? Like those are kind of my 4, things that I take, I don't ever not do. And I was flying air medical in Texas, I got a patient call and things move quick. And I actually learned in air medical very fast that slow is fast. If I tried to rush things, I would forget stuff, forget my headset, my helmet, whatever it may be. So I was pretty good about moving slow. This was day shift, beautiful day. One of those ones where you're like, oh, good, I got a call. You want to go fly. You're ready. And do my walk around. Always do my walk around. All good to go. Get in the helicopter, start it. One flight crew member stays outside the helicopter. We do a GPU start. They unplug it. They also do kind of a half walk around. They don't go, of course, to the tail rotor, but they do like a horseshoe. And he gets in, and I think it was she actually, and she says, hey, there's a spray, like a glass cleaner on top of the helicopter, on top of my door, essentially where like the footstep would be when you're climbing up on top to look on the main rotor hub. And sure as shit, excuse my language, I shut down the helicopter. I'm like, and I actually declined the flight at that time because I'm like, okay, if I forgot that cleaner right there, and then I did my full walk around and I did not see it, then I am not in this current mind space right now. So I actually took the aircraft out of service, shut down. So yes, we had the windscreen stuff there. Luckily, a mechanic was there. Him and I together did a full re-daily of the aircraft, full pre-flight, because it was so surprising to me. It was clear as day. I should have seen that. But I think it's a good lesson that even when you're doing the right things, if you're not actually doing it because maybe I'm just doing it to check the mental box of it being a non-starter for me, you can miss things, right? We're human. So do it, but also make sure that you're focusing on it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, that's a good lesson. Yeah. To have the wherewithal to stop and pause and cancel the flight, kudos, man. That's pretty awesome. Yeah.
I don't mess around. Very conservative in flying. It's always been kind of my decision making. I always go over and beyond. And, luckily I worked for a company that supports good pilot decisions. The company that I worked for wouldn't condemn me for getting the glass cleaner there. I think they would condemn me if I would have just told them to take it off and go fly. Right. To me, it's like, man, if you forget that, what else do you forget? And I've had other things in the cockpit before where I'm like, oh, look, the alternator's not on, in a Robinson, like, oh, poop. Like,
how long have I been flying?
What else did I forget? Right. I thought I went through the checklist. Yep. So, I think it's a good reminder that we're all human and you can actually have the best intentions. I consider myself a professional pilot in the sense that I really take it seriously. And I don't rush, and I don't think I really get into a lot of the hazardous attitudes. I think that's a hazardous attitude that I'm saying, that I don't get into hazardous attitudes. But I really try to have a situational awareness that's professional. And look, things happen, right? So I think it's always just really important to be checking yourself. All right, so you're in the Gulf. you're setting yourself up for, a long, fruitful career in aviation, and not so fast. You're not a full-time aviator. In fact, I don't think you've been in full-time helicopter aviation for quite some time. What happened? What was the shift? What did you end up doing, and why did you make that decision?
Yeah, I went to EMS after the Gulf and had the sweet 429 job at home, and it was friggin' awesome. I loved it. But my wife had started a property management firm, and it blew up. And all of my time that wasn't in the 7-7 schedule was in the business, and it was so busy. And I found myself working the day shift at the business when I had the night 7 going on. And I remember a time that I was like, well, I'm not really rested. Yep, you've been there. And it's an easy trap to get into. And I thought, I have to make a choice. I have to choose what, at the time, financially best for my family. Because, back then, and I think still now, it's not amazing pay in the EMS world, sadly.
It's better, but
it's better.
It's not great for what it is, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to cast a little light too. All my buddies were non-union EMS pilots making more money than my union position.
Go figure.
Yeah, go figure. You're screwing me, union. So
yeah,
anyway,
don't get me started on unions. I could probably go down a rabbit hole there.
Oh, I could too for ages. But anyhow, the business blew up, and I saw that light. We had previously had a car wash, a full service car wash in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and I was flying EMS down there. And I was more regimented about not working both when I had a night shift. But when I moved to where I live now and flying the 429, I caught myself working the day a little bit too much and not having the rest for that night shift. And it was a busier, more complex aircraft. I had to make a decision. And the business blew up. I greatly blessed that business has been sold. Well, we did a national merger and went into multiple markets, and then sold it to a VC, as actually a private equity firm in California. Yeah. And my wife she was like a glutton for punishment, started another business, and it's in the process of being sold to a private equity firm as well. So yeah, we just really love the entrepreneurial world.
Power couple.
Yeah. I married up. That's what the truth is right there.
Hey, nothing wrong with that, brother. It's
right.
Interesting that you say that because, I don't get the opportunity to talk to a ton of entrepreneurs all the time, specifically entrepreneurs that had helicopter life. And that was a big struggle for me. And actually, another conviction that I'm happy to, put myself on the record for saying is that I was working nonstop. I was flying helicopters for air medical. When I wasn't flying helicopters for air medical, I was selling helicopters on the side, and I was also selling roofs. I was in Texas, South Texas. They get a lot of hail, make a lot of money in 6 months selling roofs. I ended up being the number one sales guy while still being a full-time air medical pilot and having my side hustle and selling helicopters. And I love that. I mean, that's like me. I was young. I'm like, yeah, you sleep when you're dead. But then you start to realize, like, man, it's okay. I just worked all day and I didn't get any rest. And now I'm going in for a night shift. And, my crew recognized it. Now, they went around in a way that wasn't great, in my opinion. Instead of coming and just talking to me directly, they went right to my RDFO at the time, guy named Mark, and essentially said, hey, look, we don't think he's rested because we know he's doing other work, so because I was proud of what I was doing. And so I would share that. That was probably a lesson in there as well. But, I can't actually say that they were wrong. I wasn't really getting any rest. The other caveat, though, is I sucked sleeping at the daytime. Like, I just couldn't really do it.
Yep.
So, like, I tried, lay there for a few hours, like, all right, I give up. I'm just going to go make money, right? But that is actually can be very dangerous. And I think a lot of people get into air medical thinking that they're going to have all this time for side hustles and activities, which, you did, I did. I know a lot of people that still successfully do it, but it's a very fine line. It's a line that I wasn't willing to walk anymore, just like you.
I actually love that about EMS. I love that 7-7 schedule. I love it how it affords the additional opportunities, but you're right. It has to be clearly defined for yourself, because otherwise you're really flirting with danger there.
Yeah, it's big business, right? It's big, serious thing anytime you're operating a helicopter. And even on my best day, man, getting woken up at 3 a.m. to go fly is you're not your best,
Right.
and that's another thing. I don't know how you make air medical better. A lot of countries require two engines, two pilots. I think that's a good start. I am surprised that the United States will fly at night with one pilot, single engine. I guess it works. The industry itself has become dramatically safer. What year were you flying air medical?
So that was, let's see, 2010 through 16, I think.
Okay, so not recent. Pretty recent. So you were probably in the same time area that I was, where the industry as a whole was doing a lot better
Yeah.
regarding safety, right? When I was a kid, or even in flight school or going into and learning about things, I remember, oh man, air medical, there's so many deaths, there's so many accidents, so many crashes. Do you feel that the company that you worked for was on the trend of supporting pilots, having nice equipment, and supporting good decision making?
Totally, 100%. It was, it was Air Methods. It was OmniFlight and then Air Methods, but it was because of an acquisition that came over to Air Methods. But yeah, I felt that there was never pressure to fly. Beyond that, I was at a hospital base and they leased the aircraft. They own the aircraft and leased the pilots, mechanics. And they always had a culture of safety too. I never felt pressured, even when I turned down a flight that, why'd you turn that down? And nobody ever busted me for it, like gave me a hard time for it. Which was rare because I really never turned anything down because I felt like it was my job to be prepared. Let me be prepared. And so I came with that mindset. But yeah, I think the industry has certainly changed and certainly for the better. And the equipment was amazing too, beyond that.
Yeah, 100%. The 429 is an aircraft that I never got to fly, actually. So I'm jealous of that. But yeah, I think you and I got to fly in a different era of air medical, which made it better. But I still think the United States specifically is a little wonky. Even just the billing aspect of it kind of is a weird situation for me. I'm not necessarily like, look, I'm a capitalist, right? I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a business owner. I love capitalism. I think that's incredible. But I also agree in some social programs, like, a fire station or police, and I also think that air medical should maybe kind of fall within that because, man, some of these bills, producer Zach, who got to ride in the back of an air medical helicopter, actually a helicopter that him and I used to crew. And, he was a passenger. He was in an accident. I know what his bill was. It wasn't cheap, right? And so, to me, the air medical stuff is weird on the billing. Also, I just think it's a little weird, single engine, night operation, single pilot. We're asking for trouble, but it just hasn't really come yet. So it's kind of a hard argument, and look, it all takes money and kudos to the air medical companies because the company like I worked for, Air Evac, man, they invested so much money in updating their fleet, glass cockpit, autopilot, night vision, better training, just, twofold. They always supported pilots. In fact, when I got in trouble about, burning it too much on each end, the RDFO approached it like a pro. Like the way that he brought it to me and the way that we worked through it was incredible, and that's the kind of manager that you want. And he's someone that no matter the situation, always advocated for pilots. And so I really appreciated that in my experience. So a little bit of I don't know if I can call it controversial, but a hot topic gaining a lot of momentum and speed. And I was fortunate enough to talk to Jason on my podcast. So if you haven't listened to my podcast, check it out with Jason Hill. I'm referring to of Hill Helicopters, United Kingdom. You and I connected through Clint, Clint Pulver is big into the Hill. He's doing all the super cool videos for Hill. He's currently in a 44 himself, preparing for his HX delivery. And I know that you have a couple Hills on order, experimental and the commercial version. What was your first? How did you hear about Hill? What was your first thoughts? How do you feel now? There's been some new updates. just open conversation. You know how I feel, right? We talked about this yesterday. I'm fairly neutral, but excited for Hill is really my stance. I think it's the best way to put it. But just kind of curious to hear the dichotomy of you entering that community.
Thank you to our sponsor, Vertical Aviation International. Are you ready for the largest vertical aviation show in the world? Verticon, formerly HAI HeliExpo, is coming to Dallas in March. With over 15,000 professionals and 600 companies in attendance, this is an event you don't want to miss. If you're interested in exhibiting, contact sales at verticalavi.org. That's sales at verticalavi.org. See you at Verticon.
Yeah, I heard about Hill first, believe it or not, from a Facebook ad. And of course, that was very well targeted. So kudos to Facebook on that. But
I was going to say, Mark, thanks, Mark. Appreciate you.
Yeah. And I saw, it was in my opinion, this is going to sound corny, but it's like love at first sight. The helicopter industry, the biggest travesty in the industry, in my opinion, is lack of innovation and lack of design. You have years of platforms that have relatively not changed. And, 40-year-old platforms still the same today. They're producing them out of a factory and really not much change. What does change? Well, the avionics, but they don't even vertically integrate those avionics. They have to third party those out to Garmin or whoever else. And it's like, come on, I think we could do better as an industry. So when I saw what they were offering, I jumped. I was like, this is exciting to me. Finally, somebody's going to do something about what I think is a travesty in the industry. And of course, I was the clickbait, right? So I see the ad, I schedule a time, I have a meeting. I hadn't even told my wife at this stage, right? And I'm like, babe, my dream about owning a helicopter. I think that reality can actually come true. And, and it's relatively less expensive than, if I was to go buy a 505 or something like that, somewhat more modern equivalent. And I hopped on it. And yeah, there's a lot of skepticism, if you will. Like especially as an early adopter, I think my serial number for the HX is 370. So it's pretty low. They're around the 11 or 1200.
I was going to say it's about 1200 now, I think.
Yeah, it's quite a bit down, but I saw it also as an opportunity, as a financial opportunity. If I get in early enough, there is, just like buying a supercar, there's an opportunity to sell that serial number for a higher price in the future if I don't want it. Of course, it doesn't work out if it doesn't work out, right? So if, that financial side of that, if Hill doesn't pull through and make it happen, then obviously it doesn't work out. But I'm 100% optimistic that it will. I believe that Jason Hill is the Elon Musk of the helicopter world. And I know that's probably been said a little too lightly, but having known him, met him, seen the actual product, been to England to check it out myself and to watch I watched those updates like complete focus,
Yeah.
I mean? And I feel like they're being super transparent with the business. And you know what? That's how you build trust and loyalty with the customer base. They're putting all of us are putting our neck out there too. They understand that. They understand that part of that, and bringing us along the ride is pretty intriguing. So,
yeah, as it gets further along, like, look, I told you yesterday that I was a naysayer, and then I had the opportunity to podcast with Jason, and that's actually one of the questions that I talked about was, does he compare himself to Elon Musk? And he was gracious. He answered it pretty well. Is that, I don't think he does. I think that there's a lot of differences in what he's doing compared to what Elon's done. But I think it's a fair comparison. I think Tesla specifically is very much like the Hill helicopter, right? In fact, when I explain it to non-Hill people or non-helicopter people, I explain it as like a Tesla. It's like the Tesla equivalent. For our listeners who may be unfamiliar, Jason Hill has a doctorate in rotorcraft, engineering, super smart guy, very humble, very smart, very well-spoken. It's something that apparently he's wanted to do ever since he was a little kid. And essentially he's building what he considers to be the greatest hits of helicopters. So he's not making anything new per se. He's taking design concepts from existing certified aircraft and putting them into one unit to make it the greatest hits of helicopters, Fenestrum, the rotor head, the transmission. But he's also fabricating and hopefully certifying all the parts in-house. So the engine, the main rotor blades, everything built in-house. So there's no third party. Obviously, we see big delays right now in OEM delivery of new helicopters because of the third party reliance. And we're, still the ripple effect that we had with our supply chain issues, during COVID and things like that. So, he's really well thought out this plan. There's still lots of hurdles. There's a reason why innovation doesn't exist in aviation, and it's because regulators make it difficult. And I think regulators are important. So I'm not naysaying regulators. I think we have to have regulators. But look at Boeing, right? Some of the trouble that they've got themselves into, which I understand, and maybe I'm wrong, so feel free to comment. But they're working off a 737 type certificate still that was however many years old, because to create a new aircraft, that's going to take way too long, way too much regulation involved, and more money than they're willing to spend. And so they keep just building off the original type certificate to a point where, the original type certified 737 has no similarities to the 800 MAX, for example, or now the 900. And, I think a lot of OEMs have done that, right? The A-Star's been around for 50 years, the R22 and 44 now coming up on, 50 years for the 22. And I don't know, maybe I'm guessing around a lot of years for the 44. I don't actually know, but late 90s, late 90s, I think, when the Astro was coming out, things like that. Bell products, Shawn, we've been talking a lot about Bell, right? The aircraft that we're talking about, built in 1987, older than I am. I sold a Bell Jet Ranger recently that was 67. That helicopter is being built when they're shipping out Hueys to Vietnam.
Serial number 1?
No, it was close. It was 60 or something. So yeah, very low serial. So that said, I understand why there hasn't been innovation, right? Because the regulatory bodies are tough. And then you can't just think of one regulatory body. Yep. You have to think of the FAA, EASA, CAA, all these different regulating bodies that control worldwide aviation. And there's just a level of complexity. So if I'm naysaying anything, it's just about the certification. Jason has some pretty good answers on his path to certification, and I liked his articulation of that. But I also think it's optimistic, just based on I've been able to have some conversations with people that are way smarter than me, that are part of existing OEMs, and of course they're incentivized to naysay it, right? But I think that's going to be the holdup. But again, I'm rooting for it. I think it's great to move the industry forward. And I know, whether they say it out loud or not, the OEMs are taking notice, especially now. Great showing at Heli Expo. I don't know if you got to go, Shawn, and the Hill area was quite busy, and Jason was a very popular guy at this year's PASS Expo. I'm sure other OEMs are taking note, and that's going to just push them to innovate, right? And that's important.
Yeah, it definitely, we need the conversation. I think we also need a serious conversation at a regulatory level that says, look, it shouldn't be this difficult to get a new type certificate. And when we have just iterations of the same certificate over and over again, it's probably time to look at a bigger picture so we can innovate an industry instead of being left behind. It's just it's just no other industry. I mean, look how frequent a car industry restamps like Ford comes up with a new Ford F-150 design every 1 or 2 years.
Yeah.
Why? Because they could get through the regulatory bodies, and there probably isn't very many.
Yeah, it's definitely probably easier hurdles. I think it's a lot of factors. I think it's budget. I think it's resources. I don't think enough funding is being put towards regulatory bodies. I think recently with the Boeing stuff specifically, that's really tightened down regulators. I also think that good talent follows the money, and there's less money to be made as a regulator than going into the private sector. If I'm an engineer that builds helicopters, I'm going to go work for an OEM and make good money. I'm not going to go and get my little government check with good government benefits, of course, but I'm not going to go and be a regulator. And so I think that's part of it. I think In fact, in a recent podcast I did with David Smith of Robinson, he was really candid about that idea of like, hey, look, the best talent doesn't really go to the regulatory bodies. So maybe there's a sharing program. Maybe sometimes companies like Robinson can have some of their bright talent go and be on the regulation side for a couple of years, learn that side, and vice versa. Have regulators come and work at the OEM. Maybe they can understand each other a little bit better. I kind of like that advice. And I think it just takes more funding. Organizations like VAI, who's a sponsor of the podcast, they're constantly advocating in Washington for the helicopter industry. And a big part of that is pushing to best figure out the regulatory side, especially now with eVTOL and all the other interesting things that are coming into play that are now just taking up more resources. So, Shawn, I think we're at the precipice of a pretty interesting second half of my life, I guess, when it comes to helicopters. I'm kind of hoping that like I can retire by the time it's like completely shifted, so I can just like do what I'm good at and not have to like reinvent the wheel. But look, I think that we're going to see some pretty big changes in the next 5 to 10 years, no doubt.
Yeah, rightfully so. I'm excited to see those changes. I'm glad to see it.
Yeah, I think it's cool. Well, Shawn, thanks so much for coming on. This is very interesting. Started as a career in aviation, moved into the entrepreneurial route. Sounds like it worked out for you, and I'm curious to hear more about that when I'm on your podcast, and I'm excited to join that podcast as an entrepreneur. For those listening, if you have entrepreneurial desires, but you're a helicopter pilot, that's not a bad thing. You can figure it out, right? You can go into a completely different space like Shawn and his wife did, or you can do what I did is, I had an entrepreneurial itch, and staying within helicopters seemed to be the most logical thing for me because that's all I know. I don't know anything else in this world. I know helicopters really well. So you should stick with what you're good at. But, just because you're a pilot doesn't mean that you can't do a side business or transition into a full-time business. Or maybe it's not so much the entrepreneurial side, but you're interested in being in the management side. You want to be a chief pilot. You want to be an executive. Those are all pathways that you can have in this industry. You just have to set those goals and you have to do what you can to achieve that. So super cool conversation, Shawn. It means the world that you'd be willing to come and talk to us today. Any parting thoughts before we dismount here?
Man, the only thought I have is the helicopter world is a phenomenal industry. I miss it dearly. But I would just say, stay focused. If you're thinking about going that route, stay focused. It's a life dedicated business, but it's also one that you could do side hustles with. And I was lucky enough to buy a bunch of rental properties and be able to tap out of the day-to-day work if I have to. I don't have to work anymore. So, Halsey, great podcast. Thank you so much for your time. I've enjoyed this very much, and looking forward to chatting tomorrow.
Yeah, looking forward to being on your podcast. To our listeners, thank you again. Make sure that you're liking and you're following. You can also follow the Helicopter Podcast and Heli Halsey on all social media platforms. It's at the Helicopter Podcast or at Heli Halsey. Some more exciting content coming your way, specifically on the Heli Halsey side. So stay tuned for that. Again, MHM, big shout out to you guys for creating such a wonderful platform that's done so great so fast at the HeliCASTS platform. We had such a great time at Europe, at European Rotors. Really looking forward to this year's Heli Expo in Dallas, where we're also going to be kicking ass and taking names when it comes to all things helicopter podcasting. Just so fortunate and blessed to be on such a wonderful platform that's really moving towards innovation on that side. So shout out to them and to our sponsors. Thank you so much. We appreciate you guys. And most of all, thanks to our listeners. We'll catch you on the next edition of the Helicopter Podcast. See ya.
Thank you to our sponsor, Metro Aviation. Metro Aviation, the world's largest family-owned aeromedical operator, offers comprehensive aircraft services with 140 plus aircraft in over 25 states. The Completion Center installs medical and law enforcement kits and avionics, serving diverse aviation needs including offshore, utility, VIP, and corporate sectors.
Thank you to our sponsor, Precision Aviation Group. Mission-critical operators and fleet managers rely on Precision Aviation Group as a worldwide leading rotor and fixed-wing MRO provider. PAG provides tip-to-tail solutions in 4 MRO segments: avionics, components, engines, and manufacturing DER services. A single point of contact gives you access to over 150 million in inventory globally, 24/7. Just call 800-537-2778. Precision Aviation Group. Others sell parts. We sell support.
Thank you to our sponsor, Vertical Aviation International. Are you ready for the largest vertical aviation show in the world? Verticon, formerly HAI Heli Expo, is coming to Dallas in March. With over 15,000 professionals and 600 companies in attendance, this is an event you don't want to miss. If you're interested in exhibiting, contact sales at verticalavi.org. That's sales at verticalavi.org. See you at Verticon.